Even as old reflexes try to pull me back into flinching, I practice staying where kindness finds me. I picture the room that holds our conversation. Not a tribunal, but a kitchen with light spilling across the table, the kettle humming its soft approval. I sit again, even if yesterday was messy. I name one honest thing, then another. The truth doesn't scare him. It unknots me, thread by thread, until breath moves easily in my chest. The kitchen becomes my training ground for honesty. I notice how the morning light catches dust particles suspended in air, each speck visible and unhidden, and I ask to be that transparent before God. No performance, no curated version of myself that costs energy to maintain. Just the plain truth of who I am in this moment. Tired some days, hopeful others, confused more often than I'd like to admit. I pour my coffee and let the ritual slow me down enough to notice what I'm actually feeling instead of what I think I should feel. The mug warms my hands and I realize that presence is a skill I'm still learning. That being here fully is harder than it sounds when a lifetime of habit taught me to be anywhere but here. Quick roll call. What city are you speaking from today? Drop your city in the comments so we can see where our community is tuning in from. I keep learning that God is not a riddle to be solved, but a relationship to be lived. So I let questions walk beside me without demanding they hurry. Why did this break here? Why did this beauty arrive now? I don't force conclusions. I gather clues. The peace I feel is not from knowing everything, but from being known entirely and still held with a patience that outlasts my doubts. Some questions hang in the air for months before I understand that the hanging itself is the answer, that not every mystery needs resolution by Tuesday. I write these questions in a journal I keep by the window, and sometimes when I flip back through pages, I find that life has quietly answered what my impatience couldn't solve. A door I thought was slammed shut was actually just closed for a season, and when it opened again I was different. More ready, more humble, more capable of holding what came through. I ask God to teach me the grammar of timing, to help me distinguish between doors that are locked and doors that are simply marked, not yet. The distinction matters more than I knew. When old scripts rise, tight-chested, fast-breathing scripts that warn me I'm one mistake away from exile, I pause at the sink and let the water run over my hands. I say, almost to the faucet, almost to my heart, start over. I lift my eyes and imagine his face. Not stern, but steady, pleased that I looked up. In that glance, the script loses its volume, and love turns the page. The water runs cool first, then warm, and I let the temperature change teach me about transitions. Nothing moves from cold to scalding in an instant. There's a progression, a mercy built into the mechanics of the universe. I think about how grace works the same way, warming me gradually, giving me time to adjust, never shocking my system into panic. I cup my hands and watch the water pool, then slip away, and I remember that I was never meant to hold everything. Some things are meant to flow through, to bless me in passing without taking up permanent residence. The old scripts lose their authority when I remember I'm allowed to let go. I ask for words that fit my real size, not grand speeches, not bargain prayers, just sentences that match my breath. Be near, brighten my courage, loosen this knot, show me where to put my hands. And often the answer arrives as a nudge so ordinary I could miss it. Text her now, drink some water, forgive him before the afternoon. Step outside and let the sky remind you who's in charge. Sometimes the nudge is so simple I second-guess it, wondering if I'm making it up. But I've learned that divine guidance often sounds like common sense spoken with uncommon timing. I text her and discover she'd been thinking of me that exact hour. I step outside and the sky is doing something ridiculous with color, something that makes me laugh and remember I'm small in the best possible way. I forgive him and feel a weight lift that I didn't even know I was carrying. These small obediences accumulate into a life that looks like partnership, and partnership with God turns out to be the opposite of the rigid obedience I once feared. It's collaborative. It's conversational. It's kind. Hey, I'm curious. What city are you speaking from? Type your city below in the comments and say hi to others from your area. There are afternoons when I feel frayed by small indignities, and I want to shut the door on the world and barricade my tenderness. Instead, I bring the fray to God and ask for a gentler weave. I picture him threading patience through my reactions, kindness through my tone, humor through my weariness. The fabric changes. I do not become invulnerable. I become permeable to grace. I used to think strength meant having no holes, no gaps where hurt could get in. Now I understand that permeability is its own kind of strength, the ability to let things pass through without letting them take up residence. Wind moves through a screen door. The door doesn't collapse. Grace moves through me the same way when I stop trying to be a solid wall and accept that I'm more like a filter, holding what matters and releasing what doesn't. On the frayed afternoons, I remind myself that fabric can be rewoven, that threads can be repaired, that nothing about me is beyond mending. God seems to enjoy the work of restoration more than the work of replacement, and I'm learning to trust his preference. I'm learning the choreography of mercy. It looks like noticing the moment pride tightens my jaw and choosing to unclench. It looks like answering a harsh memory with a kinder interpretation. It looks like letting another person be as human as I am. When I practice this with people, I discover I'm practicing it with God too, and fear has fewer corners to crouch in. The choreography has steps I'm still learning. Step 1, notice. Before I can change anything, I have to see it. Step 2, pause. Between stimulus and response, there's a gap, and that gap is where freedom lives. Step 3, choose. Not react, but choose. Step 4, release. Let go of the outcome, the need to be right, the demand that my mercy be recognized and applauded. I practice these steps in my living room sometimes, literally moving my body through the motions as if I were learning a dance, and I ask God to write the muscle memory into my soul so that when the real moment comes, my body knows what to do before my mind can panic. Some days I feel like a field after harvest, all stubble and stumps, and I wonder what could possibly grow here again. Those are the days I ask him to plant something I cannot yet imagine. I close my eyes and feel the earth of my life rest under his weather. Rain has its way. Sun does too. Slowly, something green returns where I thought only brown would remain. The fallow seasons used to terrify me. The stretches where nothing seemed to be happening, where effort produced no visible fruit. Now I understand that fallow is not failure. It's preparation. The soil needs rest. Nutrients need time to replenish. I need space to remember who I am when I'm not producing, achieving, proving. I tell God that I'm willing to be fallow if that's what the field requires, and I ask him to protect me from the voices that measure worth by harvest alone. In the stillness, roots grow deeper than they ever could during the busy season, and deep roots make possible the kind of growth that doesn't topple in the first strong wind. I do not always hear words when I listen. Sometimes I sense direction like the way a room brightens when someone opens the blinds. I find myself turning toward what is true without forcing it. I waste less energy arguing with reality. I say yes to what is mine to do and no to what never was. In that clarity, fear runs out of disguises. The room brightens and I don't always notice the moment it happens, only that suddenly I can see better, that the shapes in the corner have definition, that the path forward is clearer than it was 10 minutes ago. I'm learning to trust that clarity comes in its own time, that I can't manufacture it by trying harder or thinking longer. Sometimes clarity is a gift that arrives after I've stopped straining for it, after I've released my grip on the problem and taken a walk or washed the dishes or called a friend. God seems to do his best work in the margins of my schedule, in the moments I've stopped managing and started just being. I try to live with a pen in my pocket and a readiness to bless. A coworker sighs, a child stumbles, a stranger looks lost, and I whisper blessings the way one might hand out warm bread. May you find steadiness here. May you know you're not alone. May today surprise you with gentleness. Blessing others de-escalates my inner alarms. The world feels less like a threat and more like shared ground. The pen has become my talisman, my reminder that I'm here to contribute something besides my anxiety. I write blessings on napkins and leave them in library books. I send texts that require no response. I speak benedictions over people who will never know I did it. This practice has changed me more than it's changed them. When I bless others, I stop seeing them as competition or threat or inconvenience. They become people, just people, carrying weight I can't see and hoping for kindness they might not ask for. The shared ground between us feels more stable when I'm standing on it with a blessing in my mouth instead of a complaint. When I read sacred lines that once frightened me, I read them now with the author beside me. I ask what they were trying to heal, not just what they forbade. Commands that sounded like cold orders begin to feel like prescriptions for a freer life. Warnings that felt like doom become guardrails on a beautiful road. With the author present, interpretation becomes communion. I open the ancient book and read about mercy and justice, about love and discipline, about the tension between grace and truth, and instead of feeling judged, I feel seen. These words were written by people who knew what it was to be human, to fail spectacularly, to doubt loudly, to cling desperately to a God who refused to abandon them. I ask the author to teach me to read with compassion for the original audience, to remember that these words were first spoken into specific pain, specific confusion, specific hope. When I read this way, the words stop being weapons I fear and become tools I can use, not to hurt others, but to build a life that matters. It helps to remember that I am not the first to walk this path with shaky legs. I imagine an ancient procession of men and women who spoke to God with quavering voices and found their quaver welcomed. I feel their companionship when I pray simple prayers. It is as if they nod from doorways and fields and boats. Keep going. He hears you. You are not late. You are not lost. Sometimes I speak their names out loud. The ones I know from stories, the ones whose prayers made it into print, the ones who fumbled toward faith and left breadcrumbs for people like me. I thank them for being honest about their fear, for writing down their questions, for not pretending they had it all figured out. Their honesty gives me permission to be honest, and honesty turns out to be the shortest distance between where I am and where God is. When I pray with shaky voice and trembling hands, I'm joining a choir that's been singing for centuries, and the harmony is stronger than any solo I could manage alone. Workdays can bend my prayers into shapes I don't recognize, so I practice small benedictions at thresholds. Before sending an email, make this clear and kind. Before entering a meeting, help me listen instead of perform. Before leaving the office, let what matters remain and what drains be released. These doorframe prayers keep the corridor of the day lit with a quiet, steady glow. The office used to feel like enemy territory, a place where I had to be someone else to survive. Now I ask God to meet me there, in the fluorescent lighting and the conference rooms that smell like yesterday's coffee. I ask Him to make my work an offering, not a burden, to help me see the people around me as more than obstacles or assets. The doorframe prayers create tiny liturgies throughout the day, moments where I remember who I am and who I'm working for. The glow isn't dramatic, no one else sees it, but it's enough to keep me oriented, enough to remind me that no space is too mundane for God to inhabit. I lay my calendar before God like a farmer spreads seed on a field, not with tight fists but with a hopeful toss. Some plans sprout, some die, some carry fruit far beyond their size. I ask less for control over outcomes and more for wisdom in presence. Wisdom, I'm learning, is what makes me brave enough to be here fully, come what may. The calendar looks overwhelming when I insist on controlling every hour, but when I hold it loosely, it becomes an invitation rather than a prison. I mark the commitments I've made and ask God to help me honor them without letting them own me. I leave white space for the interruptions that will inevitably come, and I ask for grace to see those interruptions as opportunities rather than irritations. Some days I fail spectacularly at this, and I end the day frustrated and tight. But more days than not, I find that loosening my grip on the schedule actually makes me more effective, more present, more human. Wisdom isn't about perfect planning. It's about faithful showing up. Before we go on, tell me in the comments, what city are you speaking from? I read every comment and love seeing where you're watching from. When discouragement thuds into my gut, I check the stories I'm telling myself. Am I narrating a world where I'm alone and unsupported? Or can I rewrite truthfully? Help keeps arriving, often quietly. People are kinder than they have to be. Grace has a way of showing up disguised as timing. I bring those corrected sentences to God, and they become rails that guide me out of the ditch. The stories we tell ourselves have so much power. I've noticed how quickly I can spiral into a narrative of abandonment or failure, how my brain seems wired to highlight evidence of threat and ignore evidence of care. So I've started keeping a list, actual physical list, of moments when help arrived, when kindness showed up unasked, when timing worked out in ways I couldn't have orchestrated. When discouragement knocks, I pull out the list and read it like a prescription, like medicine for a mind that forgets. The list reminds me that the story I'm tempted to believe, that I'm on my own, that nothing works, that hope is naive, is not actually true. The truth is more complicated and more beautiful. I am seen, I am held, I am guided, even when I can't feel it. I keep a small practice of kneeling, not because he demands it, but because my body sometimes needs to remind my mind who leads. Knees on carpet, hands open. I let the posture say what words cannot. I am yielded. I am safe. I am yours. Standing again, I feel taller, not because I fought for height, but because love lifts those who bow to it. The kneeling felt awkward at first, performative, like I was play-acting religion. But I kept at it because I needed something physical to anchor the interior shift I was trying to make. And slowly, the posture began to teach me things my mind couldn't learn on its own. Kneeling lowers my center of gravity, makes me more stable, more grounded. Kneeling puts my eyes at a different level, changes what I can see. Kneeling is an argument my body makes against the pride that wants to stand tall and independent. When I stand again, I feel the echo of the kneel in my spine, a memory of humility that stays with me into the next conversation, the next decision, the next moment where I'm tempted to forget who's really in charge. Disappointment no longer convinces me that God has withdrawn. I treat it instead like weather, uncomfortable, instructive, and passing. I tell him plainly what hurt, and I ask for the lesson without the bitterness. Often the lesson is simple and stubborn. Love again, try again, trust again. My heart bruises, then toughens in the right places, not into armor, but into resilience. The weather metaphor helps more than I expected. Weather is impersonal, it's not targeting me, it's just happening. Weather has patterns but not malice. Weather passes. When disappointment rolls in like a storm system, I can acknowledge the rain without deciding it means God has abandoned me or I've done something unforgivable. I can let it rain, let myself feel the cold and the wet, and trust that sky's clear. The lesson comes later, sometimes months later, when I can see what the storm watered, what it washed away, what it taught me about shelter and resilience. My heart toughens, yes, but not in a way that makes me hard. It toughens in a way that makes me capable of holding more, of weathering more, of trusting through more seasons than I thought possible. I ask forgiveness more quickly than I used to. I don't diagnose the entire human condition every time I misstep. I simply say, "I'm sorry," and mean it. Then I ask for help to do the next right thing. The speed of that turn matters. Keeps me from spiraling into self-critique and moves me back into the stream where grace carries me farther than effort ever did. The spiral used to take days. I'd mess up, then spend hours analyzing why I messed up, then beat myself up for not being better, then feel ashamed of the beating, then isolate because I felt unworthy of company. It was exhausting and unproductive. Now I try to cut the process short. I messed up. I'm sorry. What's next? 3 steps instead of 3 days. God doesn't seem to need my elaborate self-flagellation to take my confession seriously. He seems more interested in my willingness to keep walking than in my ability to perform perfect contrition. So I keep the apologies simple and the movement forward steady. And I find that grace meets me in motion more reliably than it ever met me in stagnation. On certain mornings, I set a chair across from mine at the table and pour a second cup as if for a guest. It's a reminder to my nervous system that companionship is not theoretical. I speak into that presence with ordinary language and wait between sentences. The waiting thickens peace around me, and I start the day less like a soldier bracing and more like a son walking. The empty chair ritual started as an experiment, something I read about and decided to try. I felt ridiculous the first few times, talking to furniture, waiting for responses that didn't come in audible words. But gradually I noticed something shifting. The room felt less lonely. My breathing slowed. The frantic energy that usually propels me out of bed and into the day softened into something steadier. I started to sense that the chair wasn't empty at all, that I was simply learning to notice a presence I'd been overlooking. Now the ritual grounds my day, reminds me that I'm not solving problems alone, that companionship is as close as willingness to acknowledge it. I leave the table feeling accompanied, and that feeling colors the whole day differently. I try not to hoard insights. When a line comes that steadies me, about patience or humility or courage, I offer it to a friend without fanfare. I don't position myself as a sage. I position myself as a fellow traveler with a fresh loaf. Sharing breaks the spell of self-absorption, and in the breaking, fear has less to feed on. Hoarding insights makes them stale. I've noticed that the things I learn but don't share tend to lose their power over time, as if they were meant to be in circulation rather than storage. So when something helps me, I look for someone who might need it and pass it along, via text, over coffee, in a quick conversation after church. I'm careful not to preach, not to make it about me and my wisdom, but to offer it like a gift I received and now have the chance to give. The sharing does something to my heart. It loosens the grip of fear that says I need to hold everything close, that scarcity is the rule. Generosity with insight breeds generosity in other areas, and I become a person who gives more freely because I'm not clutching everything in white-knuckled terror. At dusk, streets turn amber and cooling breezes lift the heat from the day. I walk and let my strides set a prayerful pace. I name what I'm grateful for out loud, like placing stones along a path. This conversation, that meal, the way the light held steady at 4 o'clock. If sorrow comes up to join the walk, I make room for it too. Gratitude doesn't exile sorrow. It escorts it gently. The walks at dusk have become sacred to me, a liturgy of feet and breath and naming. I walk the same route most evenings, and the familiarity frees me to pay attention to interior shifts rather than navigation. I notice when my shoulders are tight, when my breath is shallow, when my thoughts are circling some worry like a hawk. I name these things to God as I walk, and I name the good things too. The moments that made me smile, the small victories I'd otherwise overlook, the beauty that snuck up on me unannounced. The naming makes things real, gives them weight and acknowledgement. And when sorrow shows up, I don't try to outpace it. I let it walk beside me, let it tell me what it needs to say, and I trust that the walking itself will process something my sitting couldn't touch. When I'm tempted to read my circumstances like a verdict, this closed door proves you're unwanted. I take a breath and ask for truer eyes. Often I find that closed doors have spared me from rooms that would have diminished me, and detours have delivered me to vistas I didn't know to imagine. I thank God for both the yes and the no, because both, in His hands, keep me whole. The closed doors used to feel like rejections, like evidence that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, chosen enough. Now I'm learning to read them differently. Every closed door is information, not condemnation. It's saying not this way, but it's not saying not ever or not you. I've started keeping a mental file of times when a closed door was actually mercy. The job I didn't get that would have wrecked my health, the relationship that ended before it could damage me beyond repair, the opportunity that vanished and opened space for something better. The file helps me trust that the God who holds my future is more invested in my wholeness than in my immediate happiness, and that closed doors are often acts of protection I'm too close to recognize as such. I keep a phrase taped to the inside of my wallet: receive before you achieve. It is a quiet rebellion against the creed that says my worth is earned. I'm learning that achievement tastes better when it's not demanded to make me lovable. I can pursue excellence while resting in acceptance. In that paradox, my words to God come out unclenched. The phrase catches me multiple times a day, every time I open my wallet to pay for something or check for a receipt. Receive before you achieve. The order matters. I don't have to achieve my way into being received. I'm already received, and achievement flows from that security rather than creating it. The unclenching this produces is physical. I can feel my jaw soften, my shoulders drop, my hands relax. I still work hard, still care about doing things well, but the desperation is gone. I'm not performing for my life anymore. I'm already alive, already loved, already received. The achievement becomes joyful rather than frantic, and the joy makes me better at my work than fear ever did. Sometimes I talk to God while washing dishes, and the plates become parables. Suds gather like small galaxies, and I remember how tiny I am and how cared for. The warm water loosens more than grease. It softens the day I hardened against. I stack each clean plate like a new beginning. It's ordinary. It's holy. It's enough to tilt me toward trust again. The dishes are always there, which makes them a reliable practice, a daily opportunity to slow down and pay attention. I've started to see them as a gift rather than a chore. Time when my hands are busy but my mind can wander toward God. I pray while I scrub, speak my gratitude while I rinse, confess while I stack. The rhythm is meditative, the warm water soothing, the transformation from dirty to clean a visible reminder that change is possible, that what seems stuck can be loosened, that what seems permanent can be washed away. By the time the last dish is dried, I feel cleaner too, as if the practice worked on me while I worked on the plates. There are wounds I thought I had to fix before I was allowed to pray. Now I bring them as they are, fresh or scarred, and I ask for two things: meaning and gentleness. Meaning keeps me from wasting pain. Gentleness keeps me from weaponizing it. Between the two, the wound becomes a door through which empathy enters, and fear steps back to make space. The wounds don't heal on my timeline, which used to frustrate me. I wanted them fixed, closed, behind me, but I'm learning that healing is slower and more complex than I imagined, that some wounds leave scars that become part of my story, that pain doesn't have to be wasted even if it can't be erased. I bring the wounds to God with more honesty now. I don't pretend they don't hurt, don't minimize them to seem strong, don't rush past them to get to the victory part of the testimony. I let them be what they are: painful, instructive, transformative. And in that letting, they become less like liabilities and more like teachers, showing me where I need care, where I can offer care to others, where God is most present in the places I thought He'd abandoned. I have learned to ask for joy without apologizing. Not just relief, not just survival, joy. The kind that makes me laugh out loud for no efficient reason. The kind that spills from a song into my bones. I don't require life to be tidy to make room for joy. I allow them to coexist. God seems unthreatened by this complexity. He is, after all, joy's first artisan. Joy felt like a luxury I couldn't afford when I was just trying to survive. But now I understand that joy is not frivolous. It's fuel. It's the thing that makes long obedience possible, that sweetens the work, that reminds me why I'm doing any of this. So I ask for it boldly, unashamedly, the way a child asks for dessert. I ask for moments that make me grin, for beauty that catches my breath, for laughter that comes from deep in my belly. And God delivers, not always in the big dramatic ways I might have scripted, but in small surprising ways that add up to a life that's livable, enjoyable, worth the effort of getting out of bed. When I feel the urge to perform goodness, I check whether love is still in the room. If I've slipped into trying to impress God with piety, I stop and remember He is impressed by truth, not theater. I drop the act and say how I actually feel. Tired, hopeful, irritated, grateful. Oddly, that honesty makes goodness easier, like changing into clothes that actually fit. The performance instinct is strong in me, trained by years of learning that image matters, that appearing good is almost as important as being good. But God doesn't seem interested in my public relations strategy. He wants the real me, the one I hide from most people, the one who's sometimes petty and small and scared. When I let Him see that person, the pressure to perform evaporates and goodness becomes natural rather than forced. It's like the difference between acting nice and actually feeling kind. One is exhausting, the other is life-giving. I'm learning to let God have the real me so that the real me can become good, rather than trying to fake goodness and hoping it sticks. Patience is my slow teacher. I want transformation to be a switch. It is a garden. I can't yank fruit from branches not yet grown, but I can water soil, pull weeds, and protect saplings from frost. God loves to walk through gardens in the cool of the day. I meet Him there. We talk about weather and roots. We do not rush. The slowness is part of the friendship. The garden metaphor helps me accept the pace of change. Gardens don't hurry. Seeds germinate in darkness. Roots spread invisibly. Growth happens in increments too small to see day by day. But over weeks and months and seasons, something that wasn't there before emerges from the ground and reaches toward light. I'm learning to trust that process in my own life, to do the small daily work without demanding immediate results, to believe that underground things are happening even when the surface looks unchanged. The garden is where God and I spend time together, not rushing towards some finish line, but tending what is, nurturing what might be, trusting that growth is happening whether I can see it or not. I ask God to tutor my imagination until it becomes an ally of faith. I picture outcomes that align with His kindness, not with my fears. Then I step toward those possibilities with small, consistent moves. When reality interrupts with twists I didn't expect, I adapt without accusing Him of betrayal. Trust can flex. Flex trust gets stronger. My imagination used to be a liability, a tool fear used to paint worst-case scenarios in vivid detail. Now I'm learning to redirect it, to imagine redemption instead of ruin, connection instead of isolation, growth instead of decay. This isn't denial or toxic positivity. It's choosing which story to rehearse. When I imagine God's kindness showing up in my situation, I start to notice evidence of it that I would have missed if I'd been scanning only for threat. And when things don't go as I imagined, I practice the flex. Okay, not that way, but still held, still guided, still loved. The flex is where faith gets its strength training, and strong faith can handle surprises without shattering. On the days I feel spiritually inarticulate, I let creation pray for me. Trees lift their hands. Rivers carry petitions with a sound older than my worry. Birds improvise intercessions on thin branches. I stand in the congregation of things that know their place in the choir, and I borrow their confidence until mine returns. Sometimes I have no words, and on those days I go outside and let the world pray on my behalf. The trees seem to know something I've forgotten. The river moves with a confidence I've lost. The birds sing without needing permission or approval. I stand among them and let their prayer become mine. Let their simple fidelity to their nature remind me of mine. I don't have to manufacture eloquence or perform spirituality. I just have to show up and let creation teach me how it's done. By the time I return inside, my own voice feels less crucial, and the silence feels less like absence and more like the space where listening happens. I practice asking for help from people as a way of practicing asking for help from God. The humility required feels like a stretch in the tightest muscle, but the relief afterward is real. When help comes, I receive it without apologizing for existing. Receiving help is not weakness. It is a form of agreement with grace. Agreement with grace is how fear loses jurisdiction. Asking for help used to feel like failure, like admission that I wasn't capable or strong or independent enough. Now I'm learning that asking for help is actually a sophisticated form of strength. It requires self-awareness, humility, and trust. When I ask someone to help me move, or to explain something I don't understand, or to pray for me when I'm overwhelmed, I'm practicing the posture I need with God. I'm saying I can't do this alone. I need you. I trust you to be kind with my need. And when help comes from people or from God, I'm learning to say thank you instead of I'm sorry, to receive it as gift instead of debt, to let it nourish me instead of shame me. I'm learning to enter rest before I've earned it, because rest is not a wage. It is a gift that equips me to work cleanly. On Sabbath moments, I shut the laptop, silence the second-guessing, and let a simple meal feel like communion. Rest recalibrates my capacity to hear. In the quiet, the voice of love sounds less like a faint suggestion and more like a bell. Rest used to feel like something I'd get to eventually after everything was done, after I'd earned it through sufficient productivity. But everything is never done, and that formula kept me exhausted and bitter. Now I'm learning to rest first, to let rest be the foundation rather than the reward. When I rest before I've earned it, I'm making a theological statement. I am not a machine. My worth is not my output. I am invited to stop not because I've finished, but because stopping is holy. In the rest, my nervous system settles, my perspective widens, and I can hear God more clearly because I'm not drowning in the noise of my own striving. I forgive outcomes that didn't match my prayers. This is not resignation. It is allegiance to a larger story. I trust that my limited vantage point cannot measure the full geometry of goodness. I tell God where it still aches and ask Him to keep me soft. Softness is not a liability. It's the condition in which seeds can still take root. The unanswered prayers used to feel like evidence that God wasn't listening or didn't care. Now I'm learning to hold them differently, not as failures of faith, but as invitations to trust something bigger than my ability to understand. I don't know why this prayer was answered and that one wasn't. I don't know why this door opened and that one stayed closed. But I'm learning to trust that the person holding all the information cares more about my wholeness than about my immediate comfort, and that what looks like no from my angle might look like not yet, or I have something better from his. The ache remains. I don't pretend it doesn't hurt, but I bring the ache to him and ask him to keep me soft enough to hurt, which is to say, soft enough to love. To keep fear from rewriting my history, I practice testimony. Even if the congregation is only me and the ceiling, I say out loud what God has done. The provision that arrived from nowhere, the reconciliation that seemed impossible, the morning when despair cracked and light got in. Remembering is resistance against lies. It is also worship that goes on working after the words end. Fear is a revisionist historian. constantly editing my past to prove that nothing works out, that hope is naive, that I'm on my own. So I fight back with testimony, with the practice of remembering out loud. I tell stories of faithfulness, of moments when help showed up, of times when I was certain I wouldn't make it and yet here I am. I write them down. I speak them into the air. I mark them with stones of remembrance that I can come back to when memory fails. The practice is warfare disguised as gratitude, and it works. When I remember what God has done, fear has less material to work with, fewer gaps to fill with its fabrications. When I catch myself bargaining, if you do this, I'll do that, I smile at my old superstition and bring it into the open. I admit what I want without attaching strings. God does not negotiate under duress. He gives from love. Releasing the bargain frees me to receive without debt and to obey without fear of fines. The bargaining instinct runs deep, rooted in a transactional view of relationship that I'm slowly unlearning. I catch myself doing it. If you heal this person, I'll volunteer more. If you give me this job, I'll tithe faithfully. If you fix this marriage, I'll read my Bible every day. It's exhausting and it doesn't work. God isn't interested in my deals because He's not interested in controlling me through contract. He wants relationship, not transaction. So I'm learning to ask for what I want plainly. Help me, heal them, provide this, open that, and then to let go of the outcome, to trust that His love doesn't depend on my performance and His provision doesn't require my negotiation. The release is terrifying and liberating at once. I stay curious about my own defensiveness. When I feel my voice sharpen, I ask what I'm protecting. Often the answer is something tender, a desire to belong, a fear of being misunderstood. I offer that tenderness to God instead of weaponizing it. He guards what I entrust to Him, and with less to guard alone, I speak more calmly, more truly. Defensiveness is my tell, the sign that something vulnerable has been touched. Instead of reacting automatically, I'm learning to pause and investigate. What just got poked? What am I afraid will be seen or lost or judged? Usually it's something young and scared in me, some part that learned to defend before it learned to trust. When I find that part, I don't shame it for being defensive. I understand it, I thank it for trying to keep me safe, and then I gently let God take over the protection detail. He's better at it than my sharp words and raised walls ever were. With Him guarding what matters, I can afford to be softer in conversation, can ask questions instead of making statements, can listen without planning my rebuttal. In the car, at red lights, I take 3 slow breaths and let them be my theology. Gift in, trust out. Grace in, fear out. Presence in, performance out. The light turns green, and I carry the rhythm forward. Gradually, the day listens to my breathing. Meetings soften. Errands carry more patience than I packed. Breath keeps me from sprinting away from love. The red lights used to irritate me, little interruptions stealing my time. Now I use them as cues, reminders to return to my breath and to the truths I want to live from. 3 breaths is all it takes to recalibrate, to remember that I'm held, that I don't have to manufacture safety through control, that presence is more valuable than speed. The practice has changed my driving and everything else. I'm less reactive, less rushed, more aware. The day still has the same number of hours, but somehow there's more space in them when I'm breathing through them instead of holding my breath waiting for the next crisis. I am less impressed by dramatic spiritual fireworks and more grateful for steady lamps that don't flicker in the wind. The quiet friend who checks in, the passage that keeps meeting me, the practice that makes room for kindness when I'm tired. These ordinary sacraments form a scaffolding sturdy enough to hold joy and pain at the same time. On that scaffold, I speak freely. The fireworks were exciting when they came, but they were also rare and unrepeatable, and I couldn't build a life on them. The steady lamp, though, that's different. That's the friend who texts every Tuesday, the prayer practice that works even when I don't feel anything, the scripture that keeps showing up at exactly the right moment. These ordinary graces form the structure of a sustainable faith, one that doesn't depend on emotional highs or dramatic interventions, but on the quiet faithfulness of a God who shows up daily in 1,000 small ways. On that structure, I can be honest, can admit when I'm struggling, can speak my doubts and fears because I'm not afraid the whole thing will collapse. Sometimes I ask God to teach me the sound of His no. Not the no of rejection, but the no that protects. I want to recognize it without arguing. When I listen well, the protective no feels like a shepherd's staff gently on my side, nudging me from brambles. Rescued from what would have scratched me bloody, I'm freer to enjoy the field I'm meant to graze. Learning to hear the protective no is one of the hardest lessons I'm still learning. My instinct is to hear all no's as rejection, as evidence that I'm not favored or that my desires don't matter. But I'm slowly learning to distinguish between the no that says you're not wanted and the no that says this will hurt you. The protective no is kind, even when it's disappointing. It's the no that keeps me from relationships that would damage me, from opportunities that would overextend me, from paths that look appealing but lead nowhere good. When I can hear that no as protection rather than punishment, I can receive it with something close to gratitude, can trust that the shepherd who says no to this field has a better one in mind. I do not expect my fears to vanish forever. I expect them to visit and to leave faster each time. When they knock, I open the door with a prayer in my mouth and an old promise in my hand. I offer them a seat but not the head of the table. I feed them truth until they get bored of me and move on. Then I wash the dishes and sing. Fear doesn't disappear. It just loses its power to dictate my decisions. When it shows up, and it does regularly, I don't pretend it's not there. I acknowledge it, I even listen to what it has to say, but I don't let it run the meeting. I've learned that fear often has useful information. Pay attention to this, be careful here, but terrible advice. Run away, shut down, assume the worst. So I extract the information, thank fear for trying to keep me safe, and then I feed it truth. I am held, I am guided, I am not alone. This is hard, but I can handle it. God has not brought me this far to abandon me now. The truth doesn't make fear disappear, but it does make fear smaller, more manageable, less likely to make decisions on my behalf. There are names God calls me that I'm still getting used to wearing. Beloved, delight, Son whom I enjoy. They feel extravagant, tailored by a mercy that knows my exact measurements. On days when those names feel too fine for me, I hang them within reach and keep trying them on. Each time they fit a little better. Each time, my voice steadies a little more when I speak to Him. The names feel too good to be true, which is why I have to keep trying them on. Keep speaking them over myself until they feel less like costume and more like skin. Beloved, not tolerated, not barely accepted, but beloved. Delight, not disappointment, not burden, but delight. Son whom I enjoy, not son who must perform, not son on probation, but son whom He actually enjoys. These names rewrite my identity from the inside out, and the rewriting is slow, repetitive work. I say them in the mirror, I write them in my journal, I whisper them when shame tries to tell me who I really am. Slowly, gradually, they sink in, and I become the person these names describe. I remind myself that judgment was never my job, especially not self-judgment disguised as holiness. My job is to tell the truth, ask for help, say thank you, and love my neighbor. When I stick to my work, God gladly handles His. The division of labor calms me. I can be small and faithful without shame. Small and faithful is where fear has no leverage. The judgment I leveled at myself was merciless, harsher than anything I'd say to another person, and I somehow thought God approved of it. That self-critique was a form of holiness. But I'm learning that God doesn't need my help condemning me. He needs my cooperation in transforming me, and condemnation doesn't transform anyone. So I'm practicing laying down the gavel, stepping out of the judge's seat, and taking up my actual job. Honesty, humility, gratitude, love. Those 4 things keep me busy enough without adding self-judgment to the list. And when I'm small and faithful in those things, fear can't find a foothold because I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. In the end, what keeps me close is not technique but trust. Techniques help me show up. Trust lets me stay. I am learning to let God be as good as He says He is, as near as He promises, as patient as history testifies. When I do, my sentences grow simple again. I breathe and say, I'm here, and I feel the answer arrive like morning. I am too. Trust is the foundation everything else is built on. Without it, every spiritual practice becomes a performance. Every prayer becomes a test. Every silence becomes evidence of absence. But with trust, even small, trembling trust, everything changes. I can show up messy because I trust He won't reject me. I can ask honest questions because I trust He won't punish my curiosity. I can admit my failures because I trust He's more interested in growth than perfection. Trust makes the relationship real, makes my words to Him genuine instead of rehearsed, makes His presence felt instead of just believed. And trust grows slowly, through repetition and faithfulness, through showing up day after day and finding Him there, until one day I realize I'm speaking freely because I've forgotten to be afraid. I have noticed how fear shrinks my world to the size of a clenched fist, and how love opens that fist into a palm, lines visible, ready to receive. So I practice opening on purpose, even when my instinct is to brace. I open my hands over the sink, over the steering wheel, over the page where my prayers arrive unstyled, and I let the posture teach my mind what my mind forgets. I tell God that I'm still learning the difference between vigilance and attention, between anxiety and care, and I ask Him to retrain the muscles that twitch toward alarm. The retraining is not dramatic. It is repetitive, gentle, the way a river persuades a stone into softness over years of steady touch. And I give myself to that patience as if it were a liturgy written into water. The open hands practice started as a physical exercise and became a spiritual one. When I notice my fists clenched, I open them deliberately and ask what I'm trying to hold so tightly. Usually it's control or certainty or some outcome I'm desperate to secure. The opening is an act of release, of trust, of letting God hold what I can't. Sometimes I have to open my hands a dozen times in an hour because they keep clenching again. But that's okay. The practice is in the repetition, in the choosing again and again to release my grip and trust that I'll be okay even without the white-knuckled control. Over time, my hands stay open longer, and my heart follows. Some mornings I catch myself bargaining with the day before it begins, stacking contingencies like plates I'm afraid to drop, and I feel the weight tilt toward panic. So I slide the stack into God's hands and ask for a simpler menu. I say, "Feed me what I need, not what I fear I'll lack," and I wait until my shoulders loosen away from my ears. He answers with small portions of sufficiency, an email with kind timing, a stranger's smile that doesn't angle for anything, a line of scripture that fits the moment like a key fits a lock. Those portions do not make headlines, but they make a steady life, and a steady life is where courage gets to grow up. The stacked contingencies are my anxiety's favorite game. If this happens, then I'll do that, but what if this other thing happens? Then I'll need to prepare for this, but I should probably also have a backup plan for that. It's exhausting and it doesn't work. So I'm learning to hand the whole stack to God and ask for manna. Daily bread, what I need for today, not a warehouse full of provisions for every possible future. The portions He gives are exactly right. Not too much, which would make me self-sufficient and forgetful. Not too little, which would make me desperate and bitter. But just enough to keep me dependent and grateful. In that dependency, courage takes root. When I sit at my desk and the cursor blinks like a tiny metronome, I let its patient pulse become a reminder that presence is a rhythm, not a sprint. Then I speak with God about the work of my hands. I confess the vanity that wants applause to stand in for meaning, and I ask for the craft to aim deeper than claps. I imagine him leaning in, curious about the details, interested in the sentence that just won't land, the color that resists the canvas, the design that almost solves the problem but not yet. In that imagining, fear loses its courtroom and becomes a student again, the kind who remembers that learning is supposed to be joyful. The blinking cursor used to mock me, a reminder of all the words I wasn't writing, all the brilliance I wasn't producing. Now I let it be a metronome, setting the pace for presence instead of performance. I talk to God about the work, not just the outcomes I want, but the process I'm in, the frustrations, the small breakthroughs, the moments when something clicks and I feel the satisfaction of craft done well. When I imagine him interested in these details, the work becomes collaborative instead of solitary, and failure becomes part of the process instead of evidence of unworthiness. The shift makes the work better and me happier. I used to leave grief outside like a wet umbrella, embarrassed by its drip and mess, but now I invite it in and hand it a towel, and I tell God I brought a guest. We sit together without hurrying the dry. I name what was lost and what I miss, not to prove my sensitivity, but to honor the love that made the grief possible in the first place. As we talk, I notice how he never flinches at the puddle forming under the chair, how he lets the room be the room until the floor is safe to walk again. In that permission, fear stops telling me that sorrow will drown me and starts admitting that sorrow, like rain, eventually passes and leaves the air clearer. Grief scared me because I didn't know if I'd survive it, if I'd ever stop crying, if the hole would ever fill in. So I tried to keep it at arm's length, to stay busy, to focus on the positive, to move on. But grief doesn't work that way. It demands attention, and when I finally gave it that attention, in God's presence, I found it wasn't as dangerous as I feared. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it was messy. But it was also holy, a testament to the love I'd experienced, the person I'd lost, the life that had mattered. God sat with me through it, never rushed me, never minimized it, never suggested I should be over it by now. And slowly, the grief did its work and began to recede, not disappearing but becoming part of my story instead of the whole story. When envy pricks me, someone else's win lighting up the sky like fireworks I wasn't invited to, I don't pretend I didn't see the flare. I point to it and tell God the truth. I ask him to turn my comparison into celebration, my scarcity into seed, my sting into a lesson. It is astonishing how quickly the heat cools when I let gratitude walk me into someone else's joy and sit there without needing to be the loudest laugh. In that sitting, I learned that fear's math was always wrong. Love multiplies by sharing. Envy is such an ugly feeling that I used to hide it, even from myself, but hiding it only made it stronger. Now I drag it into the light and admit it. I wish that were me. I'm jealous. I feel left behind. The admission takes the power out of it, and then I can ask for help. Help me celebrate this. Help me trust that there's enough. Help me see that their win doesn't mean my loss. Usually, once I've named the envy, I can actually feel happy for the person, can text them congratulations and mean it, can let their joy be joy instead of threat. And in that turning, I discover that there really is enough. Enough success, enough provision, enough love to go around. I practice speaking kindly to the parts of me that learned to survive by hiding. The boy who went quiet when rooms grew sharp. The young man who earned love with competence because he didn't know love could be given without invoices. I introduce them to God each time they appear, as if at a family reunion where everyone finally gets a name tag and a hug. He greets them without impatience, asks them to stay for supper, tells them they're safe to set down their strategies and just be. I watch as their shoulders drop, and I realize that courage often looks like coming out from under the table and taking a chair. The younger versions of me still live inside, still react from old scripts, still believe lies that made sense once but don't anymore. Instead of disowning them or shaming them, I'm learning to parent them, to speak to them with the kindness I needed then and can give now. I tell the hiding boy that it's safe to be seen, that he doesn't have to disappear to survive. I tell the performing young man that he's loved for who he is, not what he does, that he can rest without earning it. And slowly, these parts of me relax, trust more, hide less. They come out from under the table and find that the table has room for them, that they're welcomed, that they can be themselves without penalty. Sometimes I bring God my questions about justice, about the hurt that doesn't seem to find a proportionate healing, and I worry I'm too small to carry the answers. He doesn't hand me a theorem, he hands me a neighbor. Call her, help him, give there, listen longer. These are not grand solutions, but they are the precise shape of my obedience. And when I walk in them, fear loses its false nobility, the kind that hides behind cynicism and calls it wisdom. Moving my feet turns my prayer into a path. The big questions about suffering and justice used to paralyze me, make me feel helpless in the face of overwhelming need. But God keeps bringing my attention back to the small, specific, doable thing right in front of me. I can't solve global poverty, but I can help this person. I can't end all suffering, but I can sit with this friend. I can't fix systemic injustice, but I can speak up in this meeting. The small steps don't feel adequate to the size of the problem, but they're what I have, and when I take them, I find God already there, already working, inviting me to join what He's doing. The movement breaks the paralysis, and action becomes prayer with feet. On days when my body feels like a country with contested borders, aches arguing with energy, I speak to God in the language of limits and ask for a treaty. I do not shame the fatigue for arriving. I set a chair for it and ask what it needs. Water, a nap, a walk, less sugar, more laughter. As I honor the truth of my body, I notice a holiness in the care itself, a way of saying thank you to the one who knit me together. Fear has less to exploit in a body that is treated like a beloved house, not a machine rented by the hour. My body and I have had a complicated relationship. I've ignored it, pushed it, shamed it for not performing better or looking different. But I'm learning to treat it as a partner, to listen to what it's telling me, to honor its limits without seeing them as failures. When I'm tired, I rest. When I'm hungry, I eat. When I'm tense, I stretch. These simple acts of care feel revolutionary because they're acts of trust. Trust that God made me a body for a reason, that physical needs aren't inconveniences but part of how I'm designed, that caring for my body is caring for what God has made and called good. The more I care for my body, the less fear can use physical discomfort as evidence that something's wrong with me. I have learned to leave room in my day for wonder to interrupt me, because wonder is a tutor that fear cannot bribe. A hawk's sudden shadow gliding over my page, a child's unfiltered question cracking a hard moment into light, the way steam curls from a cup and disappears but still matters. I point these small astonishments out to God like a boy tugging at his father's sleeve, and he looks where I point and smiles. That shared smile is a kind of prayer I didn't know I needed until it arrived. Wonder breaks fear's spell because it pulls me out of my head and into the moment, into awe, into recognition that the world is bigger and stranger and more beautiful than my worries. When I make space for wonder, I'm making space for God to show me things I'd otherwise miss in my efficiency and hurry. The hawk, the question, the steam, these aren't distractions from real life. They are real life, the texture and poetry of existence that fear wants me to ignore because paying attention to beauty makes it harder to stay afraid. So I practice noticing, pointing, sharing these moments with God. And in the sharing, we both smile. When apologies are due, I try to be first, not because I enjoy the taste of humble pie, but because the first apology usually gets to set the temperature of the room. I ask God for the courage to go early and the clarity to go clean, no hedging, no self-defense disguised as nuance. The moment I choose this path, fear knocks less loudly. Confusion dissipates like breath on a window, and the other person's dignity becomes more visible than my need to be right. It is a better way to be a man, and I am grateful to be taught. Going first with an apology is terrifying because it feels like losing, like admitting defeat, like handing the other person ammunition. But I've learned that it's actually winning. Winning the fight against my own pride, winning the chance to restore relationship, winning the opportunity to be the kind of person I want to be. When I apologize cleanly, without excuses or qualifications, something shifts in the room. The defensiveness drops, the possibility of reconciliation opens, and I feel more like myself than I do when I'm defending my position. God seems to honor the humility of going first, and the relationship usually ends up stronger than it was before the conflict. Even my commute became a chapel when I let it. The brake lights ahead are not an enemy. They are a chance to remember that time is not a tyrant but a river, and I can float for 3 breaths without losing the shore. I practice those breaths with him, letting the red glow be a metronome for calm. By the time traffic moves again, my mind has softened, and the next lane change is gentler than it would have been if I had let hurry narrate the whole story. The commute used to be my most stressful part of the day, a gauntlet of delays and frustrations. Now I use it as practice for patience, for presence, for choosing a different narrative than the one my impatience wants to tell. I speak to God in the car. I pray for the other drivers. I let the red lights be reminders to breathe instead of reasons to rage. The traffic hasn't changed, but I have, and that makes all the difference. By the time I arrive at work or home, I'm in a different state than I would be if I'd spent the whole drive cursing delays. In conversations where heat sneaks in, I picture God sitting slightly behind me, a steadying presence in my peripheral vision, and I let that awareness lower my voice. The lowered voice lowers the stakes, and suddenly the other person looks less like an argument to win and more like a heart to understand. I find questions instead of accusations, listening instead of rehearsing my next line, and the room unclenches. Fear leaves when ears open. The heated conversations are where I most need help, where my instinct is to defend, attack, or shut down. But when I remember God's presence in the room, something changes. I don't have to win because I'm already secure. I don't have to convince because truth doesn't need my desperate advocacy. I can listen, really listen, because the other person's perspective doesn't threaten my identity. The conversations still have friction sometimes, but the friction produces light instead of just heat, understanding instead of just victory. And afterward, I feel clean instead of victorious, connected instead of vindicated. I keep a small practice of writing letters I never send, letters to moments, to versions of me, to people whose faces still occupy rooms they no longer enter. I write them with God as my witness, and sometimes I read them aloud so my body believes me. The reading releases what needed air, and the paper holds what needed a boundary. When I fold the page, I feel lighter, not because the world changed, but because the weight shifted to hands better than mine. The unsent letters are a safe place to say everything I need to say without the complications of actually sending it. I write to the father I needed, to the friend who hurt me, to the version of myself who made that terrible decision. And I say all of it. The anger, the grief, the confusion, the forgiveness, the hope. Writing it down makes it real, makes it witnessed by God if no one else, makes it something I've processed instead of something I'm still carrying. And then I don't send it because the point wasn't communication. The point was release. The weight lifts and I can move forward with less baggage. There are days when joy is a shy animal, hiding at the edges where I'm too busy to see. So I call it out like one calls a cat. Here, joy, I'm safe. You can come near. I tell God I'm willing to look ridiculous if that's what it takes to welcome delight back to the porch. Delight comes cautiously at first, sniffing the air, then settles in my lap while I drink tea at dusk. Fear can't sit in the same chair when joy curls up there. Joy doesn't force itself on me. It waits to be invited, to be made welcome, to be assured that there's room. So I make room deliberately, consciously, even when it feels awkward or premature. I play music I love. I watch something that makes me laugh. I call someone who delights me. I tell God I want joy. I'm ready for joy. I'm willing to receive joy even though the circumstances aren't perfect. And joy comes, tentatively at first, then more confidently, settling in like it belongs. And it does belong. Joy isn't a luxury or a bonus. It's part of my inheritance, part of what I'm meant to experience regularly. And fear can't survive in a heart that's made room for joy. I practice sabbath-in-slices when I can't take the whole loaf. 15 minutes with my phone asleep in another room. 10 minutes staring at a wall that doesn't ask anything of me. A walk where the only metric is noticing. I invite God into those slices and ask Him to stretch them like dough, to let the rest rise into something that feeds more than my calendar. The rising is quiet, but I taste it in the way I answer the next email, and I know the dough is doing holy work. Sabbath in slices is my compromise with reality. I can't always take a whole day, but I can take moments, and moments add up. 15 minutes of silence in a busy day is enough to recalibrate, to remember who I am beyond my tasks, to reconnect with God in the midst of chaos. I'm learning that Sabbath is more about posture than duration, more about ceasing striving than ceasing activity. When I Sabbath in slices, I'm practicing the art of rest even when rest seems impossible, and the practice is changing me, making me less frantic, more grounded, more present. When I feel the itch to fix someone, I pause and check whether I'm panicking about my own powerlessness. Then I hand the itch to God like a tool I'm not qualified to use. I ask for the grace to be present instead of presumptuous, helpful instead of heroic, and I remember that love is a better surgeon than control. In that remembrance, my hands unclasp, and the other person becomes a person again, not a project disguised as compassion. The fixing itch is strong, especially with people I care about. I want to solve their problems, remove their pain, make everything better. But I'm learning that fixing is often about my need to feel useful or powerful, not about their actual need. What they usually need is presence, not solutions. Listening, not advice. Companionship, not rescue. When I can set down the fix-it tools and just be with someone in their struggle, something deeper happens. They feel seen and loved. I feel relieved of a responsibility that was never mine, and God gets to be God instead of me trying to do His job. I rehearse truths out loud in rooms no one else occupies, because my ears seem to trust what my mouth is brave enough to say. I say I am loved, I am safe, I am learning, I am forgiven, I am guided, and the acoustics of the kitchen turn these into a chorus that lingers long after the words are done. I tell God that I will keep singing what I need to hear until hearing it requires less effort. Fear hates choruses. It prefers whispers. So I sing. Speaking truth out loud does something my internal thoughts can't accomplish. The words become physical, audible, real in a way that thoughts never quite achieve. I speak identity truths, promise truths, character of God truths, and I let them bounce off the walls and back into my ears until they sink past my defenses into belief. It feels silly at first, talking to myself in an empty room, but the results are undeniable. The truths I speak become the truths I believe, and the truths I believe become the life I live. Fear loses its grip when I'm constantly rehearsing a different script. Sometimes I make a list of the small obediences waiting in the next 2 hours and treat them like beads on a string. Answer that message, drink that glass of water, send that blessing, step into that sunlight. I ask God to walk the beads with me, to let each small yes accumulate into a life that looks like him in ways I can't manufacture. As the beads click by, the anxiety that needed a massive victory loses interest. Small faithfulness wins by endurance. The list keeps me from being overwhelmed by everything I need to do and helps me focus on the next right thing. Just the next one. Not the whole day, not the whole week, just the next 2 hours and the few small things I can do in that time. As I do them, I feel God's pleasure, not in the size of the accomplishment, but in the faithfulness of the doing. The beads click by one after another, and by the end of the day, I've strung together enough small yes to make something beautiful, something that looks like a life lived with God instead of just talked about. I have learned to bring my pride to the same altar as my shame, because both tried to tell me who I was without listening to the voice that named me first. Pride sounds confident but is terrified of being ordinary. Shame sounds humble but is terrified of being seen. I set them both down and ask God to teach me the ease of being simply human, nothing more and nothing less. Ease is fertile soil. Fear finds fewer weeds to root in there. Pride and shame are two sides of the same coin, both rooted in a false identity, both demanding I be something other than simply human. Pride says I'm better than special, above the common struggles. Shame says I'm worse than broken, below the common dignities. Both are lies. The truth is I'm human, capable of great good and great failure, worthy of love and in need of grace, made in God's image and still being formed into his likeness. When I can rest in that simple humanity, both pride and shame lose their power, and I can just be, which turns out to be exactly what God wanted all along. When holidays approach with their expectations like glitter that gets everywhere, I ask God to help me choose substance over performance. I choose presence in the kitchen over perfection on the plate, stories over staged photos, messy laughter over curated impressions. In choosing, I feel his smile. He cares more about the warmth around the table than the symmetry of the centerpiece. Fear stops bossing me when love picks the menu. The holidays used to stress me out with their demands for perfect everything. Perfect decorations, perfect meals, perfect family moments. But I'm learning to let go of perfect and reach for real. Real conversations, real connection, real joy that doesn't depend on everything going according to plan. When I choose substance over show, the holidays become what they're meant to be. Time with people I love, celebrating things that matter, making memories that have nothing to do with Pinterest and everything to do with presents. God seems to enjoy those holidays much more than the ones where I'm too busy performing to actually be there. I talk to God about money in plain numbers so the numbers stop preaching to me. I name what is there and what is not. I confess where I'm tempted to hoard and where I'm naive. And I ask for the kind of wisdom that liberates rather than tightens. He seems to enjoy teaching me that generosity has a way of finding its way back in other currencies. Time given back to me, peace that makes fewer purchases necessary. The ledger breathes when trust writes a line. Money was a taboo topic in my prayer life, as if talking about it would prove I was materialistic or faithless. But I'm learning that God cares about my finances precisely because they reveal so much about my trust, my fears, my values. So I talk to him about it honestly, how much I have, how much I need, where I'm tempted to clutch or splurge or worry. And he teaches me that money is a tool, not a master, and that generous living produces a kind of wealth that bank accounts can't measure. When I trust him with my finances, the anxiety around money loosens, and I find I have enough, not because the numbers changed, but because my relationship with them did. When affection scares me, because receiving it means admitting I need it, I tell God first, and then I practice not deflecting. I let compliments land without swatting them away like flies. I let a hug last a heartbeat longer so my nervous system can catch up. I answer I love you with I love you too instead of a joke. Each small acceptance turns the volume down on the orphaned parts of me that thought survival meant self-sufficiency. Love enjoys being received. Receiving affection is harder than giving it because it requires vulnerability, requires admitting that I need something from someone else, that I'm not completely self-sufficient. But I'm learning that deflecting affection actually hurts the giver and starves me of what I need. So I'm practicing letting it land, the compliment, the hug,